What if your worst day was the beginning of your best life? For Lucasta Petrov, a 26-year-old waitress drowning in debt and despair, a Tuesday morning thunderstorm in downtown Seattle was just another misery to endure. She was exhausted, broke, and fighting a silent battle for her family's survival. When she saw a man shivering at a bus stop, soaked to the bone, she performed a small act of kindness she wouldn't think twice about. She shared her flimsy, worn-out umbrella. She had no idea that the man wasn't just some forgotten stranger. He was Camden Westwood, a reclusive billionaire CEO, and he wasn't just grateful he was searching. This single, selfless gesture would ignite a chain of events, plunging Lucasta into a world of corporate power betrayal and a secret test that could either save her family or destroy her completely. This is the story of how one umbrella led to a $200,000 job offer and the life-altering truth that came with it. The rain didn't just fall in Seattle, it waged war. It was a cold, relentless assault on the city, turning streets into murky rivers and the sky into a bruised, weeping wound. For Lucasta Petrov, the sound of the downpour was the soundtrack to her exhaustion. Each drop that hammered against the window of the daily grind diner was another tick of the clock, another moment closer to the end of a grueling 10-hour shift that felt like a lifetime. Lucasta moved through the greasy air of the diner with an economy of motion born from years of practice. Her apron stained with coffee and a faint ghost of yesterday's ketchup felt like a second skin. Her feet throbbing in cheap, non-slip shoes were a distant ache she had learned to ignore. She refilled coffee for a table of construction workers, forced to smile for a woman complaining about the temperature of her soup, and cleared away plates smeared with egg yolk and regret. Her mind, however, was miles away. It was in a small second-floor apartment that always smelled faintly of damp and disinfectant. It was with her brother Nico, who at 16 was fighting a battle far bigger than her own. A rare, degenerative muscular condition was slowly stealing his mobility, and the medical bills were piling up like snowdrifts in a blizzard, threatening to bury them completely. Their parents were gone, a car accident 6 years prior, leaving Lucasta as Nico's sole guardian, a role she accepted with a fierce, protective love that was both her motivation and her heaviest burden. Every dollar she earned, every tip she pocketed, was triaged. Rent first. Nico's medication second. Groceries third. There was never anything left for Lucasta. Her own dreams of being a graphic designer, of creating art that made people feel something, were packed away in a dusty portfolio under her bed, a relic from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Petrov Table 4 needs their check, barked her boss, Sal, a man whose personality was as greasy as the burgers he fried. On it, Lucasta called back, her voice flat. Finally, at 3:00 p.m., her shift ended. The rain had intensified, a solid sheet of grey water. Lucasta pulled on her thin coat, the zipper broken, and grabbed the small floral-patterned umbrella she'd bought at a drugstore for $5. It was flimsy, one of the metal ribs already bent. But it was all she had. Stepping outside the cold hit her like a physical blow. The bus stop was a block away, a small glass shelter that was already crowded. She huddled at the edge, trying to angle her pathetic umbrella against the wind-driven spray. It was then that she saw him. He was standing just outside the shelter, as if he'd given up on finding space within it. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with greying hair plastered to his scalp. He wore a simple, dark wool coat that was soaked through, clinging to his frame. He wasn't shivering violently, but with a deep, contained tremor that spoke of a cold that had settled into his bones. He stared blankly at the traffic, his face a mask of weary resignation. He didn't look homeless, his shoes, though, Wet were of good quality, and his coat, despite its condition, had a well-tailored cut. He looked lost. Forgotten. An island in the middle of the deluge. The other people at the bus stop ignored him, each cocooned in their own misery. But Lucasta saw him. In his quiet solitude, she saw a reflection of her own internal state, enduring a storm and hoping no one noticed how much it was costing her. Her own problems were immense, a mountain she had to climb every single day. What was one more small act of kindness? It was all she had left to give. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out from under the relative safety of the curb and walked over to him. Here, she said, her voice nearly swallowed by the roar of the rain. The man turned his eyes a startlingly clear blue, focusing on her for the first time. They held a profound sadness she recognized instantly. It was the look of loss. She held her small umbrella over both their heads. It was absurdly inadequate. The rain still dripped on their shoulders, but in the small space between them, a fragile truce was declared against the storm. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. It was surprisingly steady. "You don't have to do that." "It's not much, but it's better than nothing," Lucasta replied, trying to keep the umbrella centered. "The 47 bus can take forever in this weather." He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I'm beginning to realize that." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the drumming of water on the cheap polyester above them. It was an awkward, yet strangely comfortable silence. "Long day?" she asked, making small talk. You could say that he answered his gaze, drifting back to the street. "My car. It had an issue a few blocks away. My usual driver is out of town. I thought I'd try to be self-sufficient." He let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Clearly the universe has a sense of humor. Lucasta managed a genuine smile. The universe and Seattle's public transit system. He looked at her again, properly this time. He seemed to be taking in her worn coat, her tired eyes, the diner smell that probably still clung to her. She felt a familiar pang of self-consciousness, but his expression wasn't one of judgment. It was curiosity. "And you?" he asked. "Long day at the office?" She gestured back towards the diner. "Something like that. 10 hours of coffee and complaints. That sounds draining." "It pays the bills," she said, the phrase tasting like ash in her mouth. "Mostly." Before he could respond, a sleek black sedan, a Bentley Mulsanne, though Lucasta wouldn't have known its name, pulled up silently to the curb, its headlights cutting through the grey gloom. The sheer presence of the car was so out of place that it seemed to suck the sound from the air. The back door opened, and a man in a sharp suit, holding a large, sturdy black umbrella, rushed out. "Mr. Westwood, my apologies. The traffic was unprecedented." "Are you all right?" the driver said, his voice laced with panic. The people in the bus shelter who had ignored the man in the rain were now staring, their mouths slightly agape. The man, Mr. Westwood, simply nodded to the driver. He turned back to Lucasta. The sad lost man was gone. In his place stood someone with an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. "It seems my self-sufficiency experiment is over," he said, his tone unchanged. "Thank you again." He reached into his coat pocket. Lucasta instinctively tensed, expecting him to pull out a few dollars for her trouble, a gesture that would have felt both kind and deeply patronizing. Instead, he produced a simple, heavy-stock business card. It was stark white, with elegant, dark grey lettering. Camden Westwood Chairman, Westwood Enterprises. He handed it to her. Her fingers, cold and damp, fumbled with it for a second. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "You showed character today. That's a rare commodity. Please call my office tomorrow morning. Ask for me directly." and with that he ducked under his driver's umbrella, got into the back of the Bentley, and was gone. The car pulling away from the curb with a silent, powerful grace. Lucasta stood alone on the sidewalk, the rain soaking her hair and running down her face. The 47 bus hissed to a stop in front of her. She stared at the business card in her hand, the name Westwood Enterprises, vaguely familiar like a brand she'd seen on a skyscraper downtown. The whole encounter felt surreal, a fever dream born of exhaustion and rain, a proposition. From a man who rides in a Bentley, it had to be a joke, a prank, or worse. She almost crumpled the card and threw it into the gutter. It was safer to believe it was nothing. Hope was a dangerous thing. But then she thought of Nico, of the stack of bills on their kitchen counter, of the weary look in her brother's eyes. Clutching the damp card in her fist, she got on the bus. Maybe it was a joke. But what if it wasn't? The business card sat on Lucasta's small, wobbly kitchen table all night, a stark white rectangle in a world of beige and brown. She picked it up a dozen times, tracing the embossed letters of Camden Westwood's name. Westwood Enterprises. She'd Googled it. The search results had stolen her breath. Westwood Enterprises wasn't just a company. It was an empire. A global conglomerate with interests in technology, sustainable energy, and real estate. They owned half the new skyscrapers that defined the Seattle skyline. Camden Westwood wasn't just the chairman. He was a titan, a legend, a recluse, who rarely gave interviews, and whose net worth was discussed in whispers and involved the word billion. The articles also mentioned something else, the recent tragic death of his wife Eleanor from a sudden illness. It made no sense. Why would a man like that be at a bus stop? And why would he give his personal card to a waitress? It's a scam, Leo Nico said from the living room, where he was propped up on the couch, his laptop balanced on his legs. He was sharp, his mind unaffected by the condition that was betraying his body. Or he's some kind of eccentric weirdo. No one just offers a proposition to a stranger at a bus stop. His car broke down. Lucasta argued more to convince herself than him. And his driver was out of town. It's plausible. Plausible that a billionaire doesn't have a backup car, or a backup for his backup driver, or couldn't just call an Uber Black that would materialize in 30 seconds. Nico countered, raising a skeptical eyebrow. Be careful. His caution was her own fear, given voice. And yet the memory of Camden Westwood's eyes, the profound sadness in them, didn't feel like the look of a scammer. It felt real. The next morning, after a sleepless night, she stood in her bedroom, looking at her meager wardrobe. What does one wear to a proposition from a billionaire? Her best outfit was a pair of black slacks and a simple blouse she'd bought at a thrift store. It felt woefully inadequate. After staring at the card for another 10 minutes, her hand shaking, she dialed the number. Westwood Enterprises, how may I direct your call? A crisp, professional voice answered. Hello, I'd like to speak with Camden Westwood, please. Lucasta stammered, feeling ridiculous. And who may I say is calling? The tone was polite but firm, a verbal gatekeeper. My name is Lucasta Petrov. He gave me his card yesterday and told me to call. There was a pause. Lucasta expected to be told he was in a meeting to be transferred to an assistant's assistant, to be politely dismissed. One moment, Miss Petrov. The line went silent for a full 30 seconds. Lucasta's heart hammered against her ribs. Then a new voice, warm but professional, came on the line. Ms. Petrov, this is Mr. Westwood's executive assistant, Robert. Mr. Westwood is expecting you. He asked if you would be available to meet with him at 10 o'clock this morning at our headquarters downtown. Lucasta's mind went blank. Yes. Yes, I'm available. Excellent. I'll arrange for a car to pick you up in 30 minutes. What is your address? A car. They were sending a car. Numbly, she gave him her address and hung up. The world tilted slightly on its axis. The car that arrived was the same model as the one from the day before, a silent, imposing Bentley. The ride downtown was a blur of soft leather and tinted windows, shielding her from the city she knew so well, and transporting her to a version she had only ever seen from the outside. The Westwood Enterprises building was a breathtaking tower of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. It wasn't just a building, it was a statement of power. Lucasta walked through the cavernous lobby, her worn-out shoes silent on the polished marble floor. The air hummed with a quiet, focused energy. Everyone she saw was dressed in impeccably tailored suits, moving with purpose and confidence. She felt like a stray cat that had wandered into a palace. At the reception desk, a woman who looked like a supermodel gave her a practiced smile. Ms. Petroff, Mr. Westwood is waiting for you. Please take the private elevator to the penthouse floor. The private elevator was another marvel of modern luxury, ascending 60 floors in a stomach-lurching whisper. When the doors opened, she stepped not into an office, but into what looked like a sprawling modern art gallery. Minimalist furniture, vast windows, offering a panoramic view of the city and Elliott Bay, and walls adorned with breathtaking paintings. Camden Westwood stood by one of the windows, looking out at the city. Today he was transformed. He wore a perfectly fitted grey suit, his hair was impeccably styled, and the weary, rain-soaked man from the bus stop was gone. In his place was the titan of industry she'd read about. "Ms. Petroff," he said, turning to face her. His sad eyes were the only thing that was the same. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Westwood," she said, her voice a little shaky. This view is incredible. It's just glass and steel," he said, dismissively. "A cage of a sort. Please have a seat." They sat in 2 armchairs that were probably worth more than her car. An assistant materialized with a tray offering coffee, tea, and water in crystal glasses. Lucasta asked for water, her throat suddenly dry as a desert. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here." Camden began getting straight to the point. The thought had crossed my mind. Lucasta admitted a flicker of her usual dry humor, breaking through her nervousness. A small smile played on his lips. "Yesterday was illuminating for me. I've spent the last 30 years building this company. I've surrounded myself with the smartest, most ambitious people money can buy. They are experts in finance, in logistics, in law. But I've come to realize that I'm living in an echo chamber. Everyone I interact with wants something from me. They tell me what they think I want to hear. Their kindness is a strategy. Their empathy is a transaction." He paused, his gaze turning inward. My wife, Eleanor. She was my anchor. She saw the world in terms of people, not profit margins. She had a gift for seeing the good in others, for understanding what truly mattered. Since she passed, he trailed off, the grief in his eyes, raw and unguarded. I've felt adrift. I needed a reminder that genuine, uncalculated decency still exists in the world. He leaned forward, his expression intense. "Yesterday you had no reason to help me. I was a stranger, just another inconvenience in a miserable day. You gained nothing by sharing your umbrella. In fact, you sacrificed your own comfort for mine. You didn't ask for anything in return. You just did it. That Ms. Petroff is what I am looking for." Lucasta was stunned into silence. She had no idea what to say. "My wife was in the process of establishing a new philanthropic arm of the company," he continued. "The Eleanor Westwood Foundation. Its mission is to fund innovative projects focused on community health and support for families facing medical crises. The infrastructure is in place, The funding is secured, but it lacks a heart. It lacks a leader who understands the mission not as a concept, but as a reality. He took a deep breath. I am offering you a job, Lucasta. I want you to run the foundation, not as a figurehead, but as its director. You will have a budget, a small team, and the full backing of Westwood Enterprises. You will identify worthy causes, vet proposals, and oversee the allocation of funds. Lucasta's brain struggled to process the words. Director Foundation, her Mr. Westwood, she finally managed to say. I'm a waitress. I have a high school diploma and a half-finished online course in graphic design. I have no experience in any of this. I'm not qualified. I disagree, he countered firmly. Your resume is your life. You've spent years navigating a system that is stacked against people like you. You've managed a budget under extreme pressure. You are the sole caregiver for your ill brother, are you not? Lucasta flinched, feeling exposed. How did you? I had my team do a discreet background check after you called this morning, he admitted without apology. I had to be sure. Lucasta, your qualification is your perspective. I can hire a dozen MBA graduates who can create flawless spreadsheets. I can't hire someone who understands on a cellular level what it feels like to be terrified that you can't afford the medication your brother needs. That is a qualification no university can provide. I'm not hiring your resume. I'm hiring your character. He named the salary. The position comes with an annual salary of $200,000 full health benefits for you and your brother and a housing allowance. The number hung in the air, seeming to shimmer. $200,000. It was an impossible, life-shattering sum. It was freedom. It was a future for Nico. It was the end of the constant grinding fear that had been her companion for 6 long years. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden. She tried to blink them back, mortified, to be crying in front of this powerful man. I know this is sudden, he said, his voice softening. Take a day to think about it. But the offer is real, and it is firm. Lucasta didn't need a day. She didn't need a minute. This was a lifeboat in the middle of the storm that was her life. But a sliver of Nico's skepticism remained. It seemed too good to be true. Why she whispered the single word, encompassing all of her disbelief. Why me, really? Camden Westwood looked out the window again at the city sprawling below. Because my wife always said, you find the best people when you're not looking for them. And yesterday in the pouring rain, I think I found one. He turned back to her. The question isn't, why you? The question is, will you accept Lucasta? Thought of the diner, of Sal's barking voice, of the ache in her feet. She thought of Nico's smile, a rare and precious thing these days. She thought of the future she had long ago given up on. She took a deep, shuddering breath and met his gaze. Yes, she said, her voice clear and steady. Yes, I accept. The words sealed her fate. She had just stepped out of the rain and into a gilded cage, and she had no idea that the real storm was just beginning. The first week at Westwood Enterprises was a dizzying orientation into a parallel universe. Lucasta traded her stained apron for tailored business attire, purchased with a generous advance on her salary that still felt like monopoly money. Her new office on the 58th floor was twice the size of her living room and had a view that made her feel both powerful and vertigo-inducingly small. The air smelled of expensive perfume, freshly brewed espresso, and ambition. Camden Westwood was true to his word. He provided her with a small, dedicated team, a sharp, efficient paralegal named Ben Carter, and a warm, experienced administrator named Maria Flores. They were professional and respectful, but Lucasta could see the quiet curiosity in their eyes. They knew her story, the official version, at least that she was a special hire by the chairman himself, chosen for her unique, community-level perspective. It was a polite corporate euphemism for the waitress from the bus stop. The reality of her new role was overwhelming. She was inundated with financial reports, legal frameworks for non-profits, and a mountain of preliminary grant proposals. The language was a foreign tongue of acronyms and jargon KPIs, ROIs, 501c3, compliance stakeholder engagement. She spent 12 hours a day at her desk, her evenings dedicated to frantic online research, trying to build a decade's worth of knowledge in a matter of days. Doubt was a constant gnawing companion. She felt like an imposter, a fraud waiting to be exposed. It was during a senior management meeting in her second week that she first met Geneviève Dubois. Geneviève was the executive vice president of corporate strategy, a position she had clawed her way to with manicured nails and a brilliant, ruthless mind. She was tall, impossibly chic in a Chanel suit with dark hair pulled back into a severe chignon that highlighted her sharp cheekbones. When she entered a room, the energy shifted, becoming more charged, more competitive. Her smile was a work of art, a perfect, dazzling display of white teeth that never ever reached her cold, calculating eyes. Camden introduced them. Geneviève, this is Lucasta Petrov, the new director of the Eleanor Westwood Foundation. Lucasta Geneviève Dubois is our EVP of strategy. A pleasure, Geneviève purred, extending a hand with a grip as firm and cold as steel. I was so very sorry to hear about Eleanor. A foundation in her name is a beautiful tribute. I've been advising Camden on the initial financial structuring. Her eyes swept over Lucasta in a single dismissive glance that took in her off-the-rack suit and nervous posture. It's a bold choice, putting someone with a non-traditional background at the helm. Very forward-thinking of you, Camden. The compliment was aimed at Camden, but the barb was meant for Lucasta. It was a masterful, subtle assertion of dominance. I belong here. You do not. Lucasta felt her face flush. I'm eager to learn, she said, the word sounding weak even to her own ears. Of course you are, Geneviève said, her smile widening fractionally. I'll be happy to be a resource for you. The non-profit world can be surprisingly vicious. You'll need a guide. That offer of guidance quickly revealed itself to be a masterclass in psychological warfare. Geneviève would stop by Lucasta's office under the guise of being helpful, offering advice that was laced with poison. That proposal from the Children's Art Therapy program is very touching, Lucasta, she'd say, glancing at a file on Lucasta's desk. Of course, its administrative overhead is nearly 40%. The board sees that as a red flag for fiscal irresponsibility. An experienced director would know to look for sub 20%, but don't worry, you'll get the hang of it. She would invite Lucasta to lunch in the executive dining room, only to engage her in conversations about Ivy League rivalries or summers in the Hamptons topics, clearly designed to highlight Lucasta's otherness. She was an expert at making Lucasta feel small, foolish, and hopelessly out of her depth, all while maintaining a veneer of supportive mentorship. The true conflict began when Lucasta chose her first major project. Sifting through dozens of proposals, one caught her eye, a request from St. Christopher's Pediatric Center. They wanted to build a new wing dedicated to long-term residential care for families of children undergoing extended treatment. It wasn't a flashy, headline-grabbing project. It was practical, essential, and deeply human. It was for families like hers. She poured her heart into it, working with Ben and Maria to develop a comprehensive funding strategy. This was her chance to prove Camden right. This was her chance to make a real difference. One afternoon, Geneviève appeared in the doorway of her office, leaning against the frame with practiced ease. "I heard you've selected the St. Christopher's project as your flagship initiative," she said, her tone light. "Yes. I'm presenting the preliminary funding model to Camden and the board in 2 weeks." Lucasta said, trying to sound more confident than she felt, ambitious Genevieve noted. "A bit emotionally driven, perhaps. Camden is still grieving. It might be seen as you taking advantage of his sentimental state. The board, on the other hand, is not sentimental. They'll see a massive capital outlay with very little brand upside. No naming rights on a wing-low media visibility. A smarter play would be to fund a high-profile medical research grant. Something with a press conference. The point of the foundation isn't branding." Lucasta countered, her spine stiffening. "It's to help people." Genevieve's smile was pitying. "Oh, you sweet girl. Everything in this building is about branding. You just haven't learned the rules of the game yet." She pushed off the doorframe. "Just some friendly advice. It would be a shame to see your first big swing be a miss." The pressure was mounting, but another more personal threat was about to emerge. A few days later, Lucasta was leaving the office when a man intercepted her by the elevators. He was handsome, in his late 30s, with the same clear blue eyes as Camden, but where Camden's held sadness, this man's held a cold, simmering anger. "Lucasta Petrov," he asked. His voice was clipped and hostile. "Yes, my name is Gregory Shaw. Eleanor Westwood was my sister." Lucasta's stomach plummeted. He was Camden's brother-in-law. "It's a pleasure to meet you," she began, but he cut her off. "Save it. I've heard all about you." The little waitress Camden picked up off the street in a fit of grief-induced delusion. His words were like acid. "I don't know what your game is, Miss Petrov. I don't know if you're a brilliant con artist or just an opportunistic nobody who got lucky. But I want you to understand something. That foundation is my sister's legacy. It's all we have left of her. And I will not stand by and watch some unqualified charity case tarnish her name or take advantage of my brother-in-law's vulnerability." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. "I'm watching you. Every move you make. And the moment you slip up, the moment you prove you're nothing but a gold-digging fraud, I will personally tear you down. Stay away from Camden's personal life. Stick to your little project, and then I suggest you take your money and disappear. You do not belong here." He turned and strode away, leaving Lucasta, shaking her heart, pounding, with a mixture of fear and righteous anger. She went home that night, and for the first time since starting the job she broke down. The weight of it all, the corporate sabotage from Genevieve, the personal threats from Gregory, the crushing self-doubt, was too much. She slumped onto a couch, burying her face in her hands, the sobs coming in ragged, helpless gasps. Nico wheeled himself over from his room, his expression full of concern. "Leo, what's wrong? What happened?" Through her tears, she told him everything. The snake-like Genevieve, the hostile Gregory, the feeling of being a complete and utter fraud. "I can't do this, Nico," she choked out. "They're right. I don't belong there. I'm just a waitress. I should just quit before they destroy me." Nico listened patiently. When she was finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "So you're going to let them win?" he said softly. "You're going to let some woman in a fancy suit and some angry rich guy decide what you're worth? They're not wrong, they are." Nico insisted, his voice gaining strength. "They think you're weak because you're not like them. They think kindness is a weakness, but it's not. It's your superpower, Leo. It's why that man hired you in the first place." He reached out and took her hand. "Remember when I was first diagnosed? Remember how scared we were. Remember all those nurses and social workers at the free clinic, the ones who treated us like people, not charity cases. That's who you're fighting for with this hospital project. You're not doing it for the board or for Camden or to prove those horrible people wrong. You're doing it for people like us." His words cut through her despair like a beacon. He was right. She had been so focused on her own fear and inadequacy that she had lost sight of the mission. She wasn't just Lucasta Petrov, the imposter. She was the director of the Eleanor Westwood Foundation. She had been given this power for a reason. She wiped her eyes, a new resolve hardening within her. They thought she was a mouse. They were about to find out she was a lion. "You're right," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "They want a fight. They've got one." She wouldn't play Genevieve's game of backstabbing and whispers. She would fight on her own terms. She would use her authenticity, her empathy, and her relentless work ethic as weapons. The St. Christopher's Project was no longer just a proposal. It was her declaration of war. And she was determined to win. In the 2 weeks leading up to the board presentation, Lucasta transformed. The fear didn't vanish, but she forged it into fuel. The imposter syndrome still whispered in the back of her mind, but she drowned it out with the roar of her purpose. She worked with a ferocity that surprised even herself, arriving at the office before sunrise and leaving long after the city lights had painted the sky. She abandoned any attempt to imitate the corporate sharks around her. Instead, she leaned into her own strengths. She knew she couldn't outmaneuver Genevieve with slick PowerPoints and financial jargon. So she would build a presentation that Genevieve could never create one with a soul. She spent days at St. Christopher's, not in meetings with administrators, but in the waiting rooms and cafeterias. She spoke to parents who had been sleeping in chairs for weeks, their faces etched with exhaustion and love. She talked to nurses about the logistical and emotional challenges they faced daily. She met children who drew pictures of superheroes while attached to IV drips. She gathered stories, not just data. She took photos, not glossy professional shots, but candid, intimate portraits of resilience and hope. Back at the office, she faced a new, insidious form of sabotage from Genevieve. Information she needed was misplaced. Meetings she was supposed to attend were accidentally left off her calendar. Genevieve would offer feedback on drafts of Lucasta's proposal, her suggestions subtly designed to weaken its core arguments and introduce fatal flaws. "Are you sure you want to lead with these anecdotal stories?" Lucasta Genevieve remarked, skimming a draft with a look of distaste. "It's a bit maudlin. The board responds to numbers, to projected impact metrics. This reads more like a charity appeal pamphlet. You need to project authority, not sentimentality." Lucasta recognized the trap. Genevieve wanted her to strip the heart out of her own presentation, to fight on Genevieve's turf where she would surely lose. "Thank you for the feedback, Genevieve." "I'll take it under consideration," Lucasta replied with a calm, polite smile that gave nothing away. It was a tactic she'd perfected in the diner when dealing with impossibly rude customers. The less reaction you give them, the less power they have. The day before the presentation, the sabotage escalated. Lucasta and her team had spent a week building a complex financial model in a shared file demonstrating the long-term viability and community impact of the St. Christopher's Project. On the morning of the presentation, the file was corrupted. Hours of work gone. Ben was furious, Maria distraught. "It has to be her," Ben hissed, pacing the office. "The IT logs will show who accessed the file last. There's no time," Lucasta said, her voice a steel blade. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. "We know the numbers. We're rebuilding it. From scratch. Now." They worked in a feverish, coffee-fueled haze for hours, reconstructing the data from memory notes and raw source files. They finished with only minutes to spare their nerves, frayed their eyes, burning with exhaustion. As they headed to the boardroom, Lucasta felt a cold knot of dread in her stomach. This was it. The boardroom was an intimidating amphitheater of power. A long, polished mahogany table was surrounded by the company's most senior executives, a jury of stone-faced men and women in $1,000 suits. Camden Westwood sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. And in the corner, a silent observer sat Gregory Shaw. His arms crossed his face, a thundercloud of skepticism. He was there to watch her fail. The agenda was distributed. Lucasta's heart stopped. There had been a last-minute change. Presenting just before her, on a related strategic initiative, was Genevieve Dubois. It was the final, perfectly timed ambush. Genevieve strode to the front of the room, radiating confidence. "Good morning." Before Ms. Petrov presents her specific proposal for the Foundation's inaugural project, I wanted to present a broader strategic framework I've developed for the board's consideration to ensure the Foundation's activities align with our core corporate goals of market leadership and brand enhancement. For 20 minutes, Genevieve delivered a presentation that was everything Lucasta's was not. It was slick, corporate, and utterly soulless. She used charts and graphs to advocate for funding high visibility, low overhead projects, sponsoring marathons, slapping the Westwood name on university research labs. She spoke of optimizing philanthropic ROI and leveraging charity for shareholder value. She subtly framed the Eleanor Westwood Foundation not as a vehicle for good, but as another marketing department. As she concluded, she cast a brief, pitying glance at Lucasta. The message was clear. Follow that. The board members nodded, looking impressed by the cold, hard numbers. Lucasta felt the air leave the room. Genevieve hadn't just set the stage. She had salted the earth where Lucasta was meant to plant her seeds of hope. "Thank you, Genevieve Camden," said his voice, neutral. "Lucasta, you're up." Lucasta walked to the front of the room, her legs feeling like lead. She looked at the faces, staring back at her impatient executives, a hostile brother-in-law, a brilliant saboteur smiling in triumph, and Camden, whose expression she still couldn't decipher. She took a deep breath and threw her entire plan out the window. She didn't start with the rebuilt financial model. She didn't start with the executive summary. She started with a story. 6 years ago, she began her voice quiet, but carrying in the silent room, my parents died, and I became the legal guardian of my 16-year-old brother, Nico. A year later, he was diagnosed with a degenerative muscle disease. Our world, it fell apart. Not just emotionally, but financially. I learned a new language, a language of co-pays, deductibles, pre-authorizations, and out-of-network specialists. She clicked the remote, and the first image appeared on the giant screen behind her. It wasn't a chart or a graph. It was one of the photos she'd taken, a candid shot of a young father asleep in a rigid plastic chair next to a hospital crib, his hand clutching his child's tiny fingers. I learned what it's like to work a 10-hour shift on your feet and then spend 3 hours on a bus to get to a hospital just to read your brother a chapter of a book. I learned what it's like to choose between buying medication and fixing the leak in your roof. "This isn't a brand opportunity," she said, her eyes finding Genevieve's for a split second. "This is a reality for millions of families. It is a silent, exhausting, terrifying war fought in hospital corridors and waiting rooms." She clicked through more photos, her narrative weaving a tapestry of human experience. The mother trying to work on a laptop in a noisy cafeteria. The child's drawing of their family, with one parent permanently coloured in next to a hospital bed. Genevieve is right about one thing, Lucasta continued, her voice gaining power. The board responds to numbers. So here are some numbers. The average family with a critically ill child incurs over $10,000 in non-medical debt. 40% of those families lose their primary source of income. The divorce rate for those couples is 75% higher than the national average. The St. Christopher's Project isn't about building another wing on a hospital. It's about building a lifeboat. It provides a place for families to stay together. It provides logistical support, so a parent doesn't have to choose between their job and their child. It provides stability in the middle of chaos. The ROI isn't in our stock price. It's in the percentage of families who don't go bankrupt. It's in the children who get to have both parents by their side. It's in preserving the one thing that gives them the strength to fight hope. She finally put up the financial model they had painstakingly rebuilt. But now it wasn't just a spreadsheet. It was the architecture of that hope. She spoke for another 10 minutes, her voice ringing with an authority that came not from a business degree, but from lived experience. She was no longer a waitress. She was an expert. When she finished, the room was utterly silent. The executives looked stunned, as if they'd been reminded of a world that existed outside their glass tower. Genevieve's perfect smile was gone, replaced by a tight, strained line. Lucasta looked at Gregory Shaw. The anger in his face had been replaced by something else, something she couldn't name. It looked like shame. Then Camden Westwood spoke, his voice quiet but resonant. "Thank you, Lucasta." He turned his gaze to Genevieve. "Genevieve, I find the timing of your presentation curious. Almost as curious as the fact that the access logs for the Foundation's shared drive show your executive login was the last one to access and modify the file that was mysteriously corrupted at 2:17 a.m. this morning." Genevieve Dubois went pale. The colour drained from her face, leaving a ghastly white mask. Camden continued, his voice turning to ice. "I hired Lucasta for her character, and I have been testing that character since the day she started. I needed to know if the heart I saw at that bus stop could withstand the pressures of this boardroom. I needed to know if she would fold or if she would fight. And you, Genevieve, you were the final part of that test. You have shown your character, too." He looked around the table. Effective immediately, Genevieve Dubois' employment with Westwood Enterprises is terminated. Security will escort you from the building. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The words were a death sentence. He then looked at Lucasta, and for the first time, the sadness in his eyes was replaced by a look of profound, unadulterated pride. The board will now vote on the funding proposal for the St. Christopher's Pediatric Center, as presented by Director Petrov. All in favor. One by one, hands went up around the table. Even Gregory Shaw, after a moment's hesitation, slowly, deliberately raised his hand. It was unanimous. Lucasta stood there, her entire body trembling with adrenaline and relief. She had walked into the lion's den, and she had come out with its roar. After the board meeting dissolved, leaving a lingering scent of ozone and shattered careers, the boardroom slowly emptied. Genevieve was gone, a ghost erased from the corporate photograph. The executives filed out, some offering Lucasta brief, respectful nods that were worlds away from the dismissive glances of an hour before. Finally, only 3 people remained, Lucasta, Camden Westwood, and Gregory Shaw. Gregory was the first to break the silence. He approached Lucasta, his face a complex mask of remorse and humility. The arrogant, hostile man from the elevator was gone. "Ms. Petrov, Lucasta." He began, his voice rough with emotion. "What I said to you, There's no excuse. I was protective of my sister's memory. I saw you as a threat. I was wrong. Completely and utterly wrong. He looked down at his expensive shoes, unable to meet her gaze. My sister Eleanor. She spent a lot of time in hospitals at the end. She would have loved what you did in there today. She would have loved you. I am truly sorry. Lucasta looked at the man who had threatened her and saw only a grieving brother. Her anger had vanished, replaced by a wave of empathy. "Thank you, Gregory," she said softly. "I understand." He gave her a small, grateful nod and quietly left the room, leaving her alone with Camden. Camden walked over to the vast window, gesturing for her to join him. Below them, Seattle spread out like a map, the cars on the streets looking like tiny, insignificant insects. "I owe you an explanation," he said, his voice returning to its familiar, quiet tone. "And an apology. You knew Lucasta stated not as a question, but as a fact. You knew what Genevieve was doing all along." I suspected, he corrected. "Genevieve's ambition has always been a double-edged sword. When I brought you in, I knew you would be a target for anyone who saw the foundation as a path to my ear. I could have protected you. I could have warned you. But that would have defeated the purpose." He turned to face her, his blue eyes searching hers. "Eleanor's foundation cannot be run by someone who needs protection. It needs to be run by a warrior. It will face opposition from people far more ruthless than Genevieve. It will be challenged by cynics, by bureaucrats, by people who see charity as a weakness. I had to know for certain that you had the strength not just to withstand the storm, but to become the storm. It was a cruel test, and I am sorry for what I put you through. But you did not disappoint. It was a stunning revelation. The entire ordeal, the sabotage, the whispers, the pressure had been an elaborate high-stakes crucible designed by the man who had hired her. A part of her felt a flash of anger at the manipulation, but it was quickly overshadowed by a profound understanding. He hadn't just given her a job. He had forged her into the person she needed to be to succeed at it. "What if I had failed?" she asked. "You couldn't," he said with absolute certainty. "Because your reasons for fighting were real. Genevieve was fighting for power. You were fighting for people like your brother. The outcome was never in doubt." As if on cue, Lucasta's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a call from a number she didn't recognize. She excused herself and answered. "Is this Miss Lucasta Petrov?" a warm, professional voice asked. "Yes, it is. This is Dr. Anjali Sharma from the Westwood Neuromuscular Research Institute. Mr. Westwood took the liberty of forwarding your brother's medical files to me. We're beginning a new clinical trial for a therapy that has shown remarkable results in halting the progression of his specific condition. We'd like to schedule an evaluation for Nico as soon as possible, with all costs covered by the Institute." Lucasta's knees felt weak. She leaned against the glass of the window for support, tears streaming down her face. But these were not tears of fear or frustration. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. It was the call she had been dreaming of for years, the miracle she had stopped believing in. She looked over at Camden, who was watching her with a gentle smile. It was the ultimate gesture, the true meaning behind the job offer. He hadn't just given her the resources to help others. He had given her the one thing she wanted most in the world. Months flew by. Lucasta was no longer the waitress playing the part of a director. She was the director. She moved with a quiet confidence that turned heads in the hallways of Westwood Enterprises. She chaired meetings with a firm but compassionate hand, her unique blend of real-world empathy and hard-won corporate savvy proving to be a potent combination. The St. Christopher's Project broke ground with Lucasta at the ceremony shovel in hand, standing beside a proud Camden and a supportive Gregory. She and Nico moved into a new apartment, one with a view of Lake Washington and a state-of-the-art lift system that gave him a newfound sense of independence. The clinical trial was working. The progression of his disease had not only stopped, but he was slowly regaining strength, his future brighter than ever before. Lucasta finally unpacked her old art portfolio, setting up a digital tablet and starting to draw again in her spare time, the creative spark she thought was long extinguished now burning brightly. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, almost a year to the day of her fateful encounter, Lucasta was leaving the office. Her driver was waiting for her in a comfortable sedan, no Bentley per her request, but as she walked toward the curb, she saw a young woman huddled at the bus stop, trying to shield a baby in her arms from the downpour with a soaked newspaper. Without a second thought, Lucasta walked over to her own car, retrieved the large, sturdy black umbrella she now kept in the back, and walked over to the woman at the bus stop. Here, Lucasta said, holding the umbrella over the woman and her child, "You need this more than I do." The young woman looked up her face, a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Lucasta just smiled. She didn't offer a business card. She didn't make a proposition. She simply performed an act of uncalculated, genuine kindness. Then she walked back to her car and drove away, leaving the umbrella behind a small shield against the storm, passed from one life to another. She was no longer just the recipient of a miracle. She was now its architect. Lucasta's story isn't just about a lucky break. It's a powerful reminder that the best parts of our character are forged in our hardest times. It's about the strength that comes from kindness and the extraordinary power that lies hidden inside ordinary people. Her journey from a struggling waitress to a compassionate leader shows us that your circumstances don't define your worth. Your character does. The world is full of people like Genevieve who see kindness as weakness, but it's also full of people like Lucasta who prove that empathy is the ultimate superpower. If this story inspired you or gave you a little bit of hope, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who might need to hear that their struggles are seen and that their kindness matters. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that proves that one small act can truly change the world. What acts of kindness have you witnessed? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.